Side note for you, because we heard your dog barking so much, and something that nobody ever asks you about, Glenn, is something that I was burning to ask you about. Because over the course of the pandemic, I've actually adopted my first dog. And it's really kind of mind blowing to me how much it changes you as a person, how much you can love this other thing that you now tend to. Like, I'm the kind of person that takes my dog fucking everywhere. When I get my coffee in the morning, he sits with me when I go anywhere. Like, Gavin can attest to it. I hate listening to him cry when I leave him behind. But I wondered, if you could talk about the work that you do with the animals that you have. There's such a concerted effort by fucking everybody to vilify you, Glenn. I think this is probably one of your most endearing, sweetest qualities that I wanted to highlight for everybody. Was the love that you have for animals. If I'm not mistaken, you're a vegan. I wonder if you could kind of talk about your dogs and your animal activism.
Yeah, first of all, your dog sounds totally spoiled, and like he rules your life, and you have no control over him. I bet you anything that he completely dominates you and gets everything that he wants from you. And I empathize with that because that's how I am with my dogs. Again, it's kind of like with my kids. The only ones they respect are my husband. My dogs, like, they see me as their like loser friend, and him as like the real authority. But yeah, I always loved animals, like, since I was a kid. There was like these neighbors who had these 2 labs, and they used to always come over to my house, and I would just like hang out with them and just like became very connected with dogs. And then when I moved to Brazil, I had one dog at the time who I adopted from New York where I was living, and I took her with me here. And then David and I, quickly adopted a second dog, and then we started finding dogs on the street, and we would take them home. And before we knew it, we had like 3, and then 5, and then like 9, and then 12, and then 14. And the thing that I think is really true is that dogs and just animals in general can reach you and touch you in a way that sometimes you're incapable of letting other human beings reach you or touch you with. Maybe because you have defense mechanisms and you're closed off to other humans. Maybe because you're not comfortable or secure enough to like let humans touch you emotionally and you protect yourself. And so, like, one of the things that was most amazing to me is when we adopted our 2 children, and it was obviously an enormous life change for them. They came from like the poorest part of Brazil and northeastern Brazil, from like this orphanage to Rio de Janeiro, which is like a very sophisticated cosmopolitan city. Everything about their lives just radically changed. And so when they got here, what we said to them was, we want you each to pick one of the 26 dogs that we have in our house, and that's going to be your dog. And you're going to have to take care of that dog. You're going to have to do everything. It's going to be your responsibility. And we watched them emotionally open up with those dogs first before they even opened up emotionally with us. And those dogs like eased their transition into their new life and made them feel comfortable and loved, because they had a kind of, wariness of these 2 strangers who they didn't know, who now suddenly were their parents. But with the dogs just earn their trust much more quickly and much more easily than we could. And the thing that really changed me, for good, was in Rio de Janeiro, there's a huge homeless population. And unlike in most cities where I've lived, where I've seen huge homeless populations, for whatever reason, tons of homeless people in Rio have dogs. They live on their streets with their dogs. And I started getting very kind of like fascinated with that relationship between homeless people and their homeless dogs, and realized that there's almost nothing more profound in the world than that relationship. Because if you think about it, like you, Zach, you have like a family, you have friends, you have work, you have your YouTube show, you have a bunch of other things, and then you also have your dog. So you love your dog, but you have other things in your life beside your dog. But for the homeless person, the dog is all they have. It's the only being in the world that recognizes their humanity, that loves them for who they are unconditionally. And for the dog, the same thing. It's like a homeless, like grangy mutt that has found a human to love them. And they go everywhere with them. And I've seen so many times, like someone comes and gives a homeless person food, even if they're starving, the first thing they do is cut it in half and give it to their dog. And so, in part because David had threatened me that like if I brought one more dog home, he was going to divorce me, even though he's a hypocrite because at least half the dogs here are ones that he picked up on the street. But also because we wanted to kind of capture that energy, we created like a shelter for abandoned animals. But the idea of it is that we only hire homeless people who are already living on the street with their dogs. They've like exhibited a love of animals and have built this shelter around that relationship. So we simultaneously, obviously, help the animals that come to the shelter and we place them in homes or take care of them. But we also work with the homeless population to like teach them how to open a bank account, get their identification, manage their money in order to like rent an apartment, exit the street permanently, working with social workers and the like. So even like that project, it's dogs that drew me in. And, it's not that far of a leap to start asking yourself, why is it that you get so indignant if you see somebody abusing a dog? Or why do you feel so sad if you see a dog suffering, but you don't feel that way about a pig or about a cow or about a lamb or about a chicken or even fish, which is what led me into veganism and animal rights and doing the reporting that I've been doing on like the evils of factory farms as well. So yeah, animals have become an incredibly important part of my life.
Yeah, I think that's super important, and we'll let you go here in a second, Glenn, but I just wanted to add on to that too, what you're saying. I think it's so important, and there's recently been a lot of discourse, especially on the online left, about veganism and, this pretty intense debate between people that feel really strongly on both sides. And a lot of people seem to have this view of vegans and vegetarians too, which I am, that I think there's this fine line that we need to, walk carefully when we're talking about this stuff, because so many people feel like they're being directly attacked as meat eaters, et cetera, when this topic comes up, and they're like, it's a systemic issue. There's nothing I can do to change it. So I might as well just enjoy fucking cheeseburgers every day and participate in this system. And I just think there's a fine line to walk. Again, as someone that totally is on board with animal rights and as a vegetarian myself, I try really hard to not be moralizing, to not be judgmental, to be, extremely accommodating of everyone's diet and non-judgmental, like I said. But I also just think it's an accurate statement that, the animal agriculture industry, specifically factory farming, is one of the biggest unspoken of evils going on in the entire world today. One that, the majority of the population is happily participating in and doesn't even seem to understand the true depth of its unquantifiable cruelty and evil. So, it's a tough question because, again, I don't want to come off as a moralizer or someone that's wagging their fingers at people for eating meat or participating in a system, just like how, the shirt I'm wearing right now is probably made by, some person in the third world. You know what I mean? Like we participate in a lot of systems. And I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on specifically how to talk to people about veganism and animal rights without coming off like a moralizing prick.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I mean, I think it's true about all political issues, but specifically with veganism, first of all, it would be preposterous for me to speak sanctimoniously or judgmentally to somebody who still consumes animal products, because I didn't become a vegan until I was like 45. So I lived for 45 years on the earth doing exactly that, which I'm now going to tell other people makes them immoral. And as I said, I always loved animals, and yet I continue to eat meat. Why? Because there's a very powerful system in place that's designed to propagandize us, to hide from us the carnage that we're supporting, very much like the American war machine and imperialism. Think how rarely you hear about or see the victims of American bombs that are dropped. Let alone, like, if there's a terrorist attack in the United States, you're going to know the names of every person who died. You're going to hear about from their families. You're going to hear about their life trajectory. When there's a bomb that drops in Yemen or a drone that kills people in Somalia, I bet you can't name one victim of the war on terror. That's very intentional. They hide the evil and the destruction that this system wreaks so that even if you don't support it, you're not really eager to stop it because you've kind of let yourself ignore what you're supporting. It's the same exact thing with factory farms. I just turned away from it, right? Because I didn't want to see what was being done to these animals with whom I had so much empathy. And it was really once I started reporting, working with animal rights activists and seeing that it's nothing like the bucolic family farms that you imagine, where there's a bunch of pigs enjoying life and then suddenly one day they're tragically killed and they're turned into bacon. It's so inhumane and cruel. And I once showed this nephew of mine who's 13, this reporting I did on Smithfield Farms and the way that they treat pigs, just to kind of, he was asking me about it, and he watched one video, and he just watched one video, and he said, "Uncle, I'm never going to eat a pig again." And he's now like 17, and he hasn't. And, you know, for me, the way that like I came to veganism is I did it very incrementally. Like I first gave up eating cows because I once had this like experience with cows where David and I were traveling and we found this family of cows, and it like changed our energy. And I said to David, I'm never eating cows again. And then I gradually, like maybe 6 months later, gave up pork. And then I gave up chicken like a year later. And then it took me like 2 years to give up fish and become like an actual vegan, and then dairy. So I always encourage people, like, don't feel pressured. It's not something you have to do overnight. It's very daunting to change your diet. Do it incrementally. And you're right, though. Like, the reason to be a vegan isn't because you're going to take down the factory food industry through your dietary changes. That's going to take collective action. For me, it's just a question of ethical choices. It's just I don't want to support an industry that's inflicting so much gratuitous suffering and death on sentient beings. But I do think that a lot of animal rights groups have learned the lesson that, like, pouring blood on fur coats and, you know, shaming people, just like we've been talking about pretty much the whole time, is more likely to repel people, even if it makes you feel good about yourself, than it is to persuade people. And it's interesting, you know, it's becoming a bipartisan issue. There are a lot of Republicans in Congress who are now supporting legislation to cut off taxpayer funding for animal experimentation. It used to be this kind of leftist, you know, caricature boutique issue. Yeah. And I think that in a way, dogs have awakened people to the fact that animals are living beings who love, who suffer, who feel loss, who feel sadness. Yeah. And they're kind of like the gateway drug into animal rights activism.
Well, that's what fucked me up so bad is Gavin was like, Zach, you love your dog so much. You take it with you everywhere. You know that pigs are about as smart as your dog, right? And I like had a little personal breakdown like 3 hours later. I was like, holy shit, I've eaten like sentient beings that are like dogs. And of course,